Hi everyone, my name is Gian Chapetta and this is my applied assignment post-reflection. The agenda for my presentation is my introduction, pre-work, evidence, new learning, and concluded by my continued inquiry. Introduction. The applied assignment I chose to complete was an observation. The reason I chose to do an observation was to gain information about a DDL student inside my classroom. I don't have a lot of time to focus on one student, so I thought this would be a great opportunity. On November 4th, I conducted my observation on a student of mine named Zaid inside our classroom during center time, between the times of 10:40 a.m. and 11:35 a.m. Zaid and his family speak Arabic at home and uses a few phrases at school like no in his home language sometimes. Pre-work. There were two topics I was hoping to explore more during my observation: how Zaid uses language during center times and with his peers and teachers, and how Zaid interacts with his peers and teachers. From my past experiences with my student, I understand he has some difficulty speaking clear, fluent sentences in English. Most of the time, it can be difficult to understand what Zaid is saying, and most of the time, it's words put together that don't make a clear sentence. I have also known from past experiences with him that he doesn't interact with his peers all the time. Sometimes he plays alone, while other times he joins in a small group or with a single child. While achieving my associate's degree, I learned this is common for students who have difficulty communicating with others. They isolate themselves because they cannot interact effectively during conversations, which can lead to possible conflict, which the child tries to avoid. Learning materials. I chose one article and two videos from our learning materials from this course. The first learning material was the article Same, Different, Diverse from Lesson 2. I chose this learning material to use as prior knowledge, which I could use to better understand my student. The article provides research information which I wanted to use as a comparison to my student in the learning environment. The next learning material was the video titled Look at Me Using Focused Child Observations with Infants and Toddlers from Lesson 4. I chose this learning material because I wanted to better prepare myself for my focused observation. I found this video to have good information, like questions to ask myself, to help me think deeper into my student's perspective. The third learning material was also from Lesson 4, and it was a video called Clearing Your View, Staying Objective in Observations. The reason I chose this learning material was also to better prepare myself for my focused observation. The video provided me tips on what I could do during my observation and how to write my notes. Evidence. The first piece of evidence was to provide field notes, a minimum of 3 pages. I was to include my location, time of day, number of DDLs, number of teachers and students present, and the information about the child, including their age, gender, and home language. These were the 4 pages of notes that I written during my observation of Zaid. The second piece of evidence was a photograph of myself at the place of observation. I took a selfie where I was sitting, which was by a wall near the art bulletin board on the carpeted space. New learning. The experience helped me better understand where my student is at developmentally by taking a step back and observing Zaid's actions, his words, and his interactions with his teachers and peers. In the video, Look at Me, using focused child observations with infants and toddlers, it was stated observing from a respectful point of view can help us to make important discoveries about children, to learn about them as individuals, to see how they respond to other children and adults, to see what tasks are easy for or challenge them, and to learn more about how they share their needs and wants. From this experience, I also learned how to better support Zaid's needs and areas I would like to work on with him to help his progression and development. It's like the video Look at Me using focused observation with infants and toddlers mentions. These kinds of discoveries help teachers, caregivers, family child care providers, and home visitors to be responsive to each individual child's interests and needs. One thing I learned from this experience is Zaid tries to communicate with his teachers by saying what he is doing, but not in a full sentence. For example, Zaid was called to the handwriting table, to do his handwriting paper at centers. The teacher said, Zaid, come to handwriting, and he responded, I coming. When he arrived at the table to sit down, Zaid said, I here. Something else I learned was Zaid doesn't really interact much with his peers. After handwriting, Zaid went to the carpet to look at books, but didn't sit by his peers. Later in my observation, he was on the carpet playing with animals and dinosaurs, but was either standing by the window or playing on the carpet by himself a majority of the time. This resulted in him not talking. I also heard Zaid's frustration by the tone of his voice when communicating with his peers or teachers at certain points. This made him stutter some of his words. For example, when it was time to clean up, after the teacher gave instructions, he didn't stand up to put his book away. This is when another child took the book from Zaid, and he was upset, and he yelled, "That mine!" And the teacher responded, "Zaid, it's time to put books away." The teacher sat on a chair to be at eye level with him, and Zaid then in a frustrated tone said, "I want my book," and took it from his peer. The teacher then said, "I understand, Zaid, but it is time to put books away for art." This is when his frustration tone was heightened, and Zaid said, I. And the teacher cut his thought off by saying, "You could look at them later." He paused and then said, "Okay." Continued inquiry. I found this experience to be very positive because I learned a lot about my student. Prior to the observation, I understood Zaid was struggling with his language development, but I didn't realize the extent. This is something I would like to learn more about. To continue my inquiry, I would like to make more observations like this one at least once a month for 3 months. I believe this would give me enough time to see any changes. I could then use this information to make any adjustments to his learning so I could best support Zaid. Something else I could do is communicate with his family to gain more information on his language progression at home. This is when I could share my observations from school. I would like to ask my peers for any suggestions on how I could help Zaid's learning of English. Currently, I use more visuals to create connection for him, and I found this to help with his learning of English, but I'm open to more ideas. Through my observation, I realized how Zaid doesn't play with his peers a majority of the time that is allowed. This then restricts him in communicating with others. I was wondering what are some suggestions on how I could support Zaid's interactions with his peers so he could communicate with them more. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I look forward to listening to all yours.